At Kroger, we know the minute a tomato is picked, the fresh timer starts. The sooner we get our produce to you, the fresher it is. That's why we've shortened the time from harvest to home for our tasty tomatoes, strawberries, and salads. So no matter how you shop, you have more time with your fresh produce. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
And now, shop what you love and save $2 on each participating item when you buy 3 or more with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
This isn't an ad for Cinco de Mayo, and the words Cinco de Mayo definitely didn't make you want a margarita just now. But if they did, you should stock up for Cinco on Drizzly. Drizzly is the easiest way to find the best prices on beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered to your door. Download the app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com today. Or don't. Totally up to you. Must be 21 plus. Not available in all locations.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Steve Edwards.
Hello from a sunny and cold Portland.
AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at... Oh, gosh, it's kind of freaky outside. Must be the inversion. Coming at you live from the inversion.
The inversion. Now we'll have to explain what the inversion is. Dan Shapir.
Hey, from Tel Aviv, where it's 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. You tell me whether that's hot or cold.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And before we introduce our guest, I think I will explain the inversion really quickly. So in Utah, a lot of folks live in valleys. AJ and I live in the same valley. And what happens is you have warm air in the valley and the cold air comes over the top of the valley. And so the cold air wants to go down, the warm air wants to go up. And so what winds up happening is it traps all of the pollution under the layer of cold air. And so then we all get to breathe our own fumes. We have a special guest this week, and that is Gil Fink. Gil, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
So hello, everybody. I'm Gil Fink. I'm currently owner of a company, a boutique consulting company called Sparksys. I'm a Microsoft MVP and Google GDE for web technologies. Coming from Israel like Dan.
Nice. Tired of explaining your absurdly high big tech cloud bills to your boss? Let me tell you about this cloud infrastructure company that's the talk of the tech world. The name is Vultr. That's VULTR. They pack high-performance cloud compute at a price that AWS and the other big clouds can't compete with. So reap the benefits of advanced networking features, managed Kubernetes, developer-friendly API, and 20 global locations offering elastically scalable computing power. Over 1 million users have deployed on Vultr in 60 seconds or less across 12 pre-selected operating systems with their own ISO, with pricing starting as low as $2.50 per month for Vultr Cloud Compute. They offer plans for developers and businesses of all sizes. You can try Vultr for free today by visiting vultr.com/jabber, and you'll receive a $100 credit. That's vultr.com/jabber.
Yeah, I invited Gil over because we happened to meet in the context of a conference. Let's call it a technology conference that took place in Israel a while back, right at the end of 2021, called Reversim. And we were both scheduled to speak there, but then Gil had an incident.
Unfortunately, COVID-19 caught me and then the whole family. And currently we're well and we're not sick anymore. But I have coughing from time to time. So if I'm coughing during this show, I'm sorry. It's not me. It's COVID. So unfortunately, I had to cancel my session, but I recorded it and people can see it in the YouTube channel of Reversim Conference. Unfortunately, not live in person, but things happened. And I have to say something very, very interesting about the session and the topic, because the topic was using data visualization to fight COVID-19. And the speaker didn't arrive to give the talk because he had COVID-19. Okay, so this is irony in its big irony.
Well, the other irony is that Omicron arrived and basically threw all these strategies out the window. So
yeah, but that's the way we fight this stuff, right? Is we gather information and then try and revise where we're at and what we think will work.
Yeah, in this case, we gathered all the information, looked at it, and then basically gave up.
Yeah. Well,
We'll survive. The human race will
if you hear
survive.
me coughing, I had COVID last year.
Yeah, well, we
So-
survived worse than that. We survived the Black Death, didn't we? I mean,
We didn't survive it.
no, we
Other
personally
people
did not survive
did.
it. Yeah, our ancestors. Our ancestors,
Yeah.
exactly.
So being the nitpicky one that cares about the way words are used, I don't think anyone here ever had COVID. They had SARS-CoV-2 because COVID is a disease that needs to be diagnosed by a doctor, which generally is a complication that results from SARS-CoV-2, which means, for example, you contracted pneumonia and probably had to be hospitalized.
Well,
In
lucky me has not contracted it in any way, shape, or form so far, at least as far as I know.
And we hope you won't get it. I
you
assure you that's not fun at all.
I wasn't that sick this time around.
Oh yeah, you got it again?
Yeah, well, so in Utah, there was a testing shortage. So they asked us not to test unless we needed to know what it was. So we didn't die. And since I wasn't that sick, but everybody in my neighborhood had it. All the people that I go to church with had it. So I'm assuming that's what it was. It could have been something else, a cold or the flu, but it really wasn't that serious. We just stayed home, and except for the funeral we went to yesterday. So
You remind me of a friend of mine who was really feeling under the weather, had the shivers, had the fever, had coughing and so forth, and kept on testing himself and always coming up negative, and said that he basically couldn't understand how that could be. And I said, well, there still is the common cold. It still exists.
Bum, bum, bum.
There is flu out there,
yeah.
like in every winter season.
Yeah, I fully acknowledge it could have been something else.
Yeah.
It seems like everybody else was testing positive that had it. So
Well, I'm not saying that you didn't have
and had my
SARS-CoV-2.
symptoms. Yeah. No, I agree. Anyway, we are way off on a tangent. Let's talk about front-end architecture.
Way off.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's our topic for today, right? That's what we decided in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Gil said that he loves iframes when we were prepping for this episode. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to bring it back on my website.
It gives me a very big shiver, like having currently a disease.
warm
to
blanket.
use such thing.
There you go. Put a neck warmer on. It'll make you feel better.
There we go. I was wearing one just before the show. For those of you who don't get the joke. Yeah.
So by the way, are we live this time or not? I don't see us live on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, I was just looking there too. I didn't see it.
It says I will play with Riverside.
Let's just keep on going.
But yeah, let's just keep going and we'll see what we're seeing.
So, Gil, you I guess that given the kind of jobs that you do consulting gigs for various companies, you get to mess around with the architectures of a lot of companies or different architectures that you encounter in different places.
Not only encountering, but also imposing architecture. Because currently, for example, I'm doing something like in the last 1.5 years, I'm working with the company and we are building a user interface for a huge press machine for press offices and things like that. And most of the architecture of the front end there is my own. So either I'm coming and I'm seeing different architecture and I evaluate them and try to help the companies to find the solutions for things that they didn't do well, or doing new projects or helping as a front end architecture for new projects to build something new or something interesting.
So given that, can you maybe start by maybe even defining for us what an architecture for the front end actually means, and how is it different from just saying MVC?
Okay, so saying MVC is it's kind of an architecture, okay? But when I'm evaluating or when I'm coming to a company and most of the people that I talk with says something like, we chose React. This is our architecture. We chose React, we chose Redux, and boom, this is our front-end architecture. But that's not architecture. That's just technologies. So when you are picking technologies, you are doing something. This is the first thing, pick technologies. But when a project is getting bigger and bigger over time, then only picking some Redux or React and saying this is our architecture, it's not going to stand and it's not going to scale. So when I'm saying architecture, I'm saying how the data flow goes, how communication between different modules happen in our application, how our modules are built. Do we divide or vertical slice the entire front end to different logical parts? Do you give those parts to different teams, and etc., etc. So this is the kind of things that you need to ask yourself when you are starting to building a project. If you need those things, or how you are going to build those things, and then you can come up with some sort of ideas of how to build your architecture. And MVC is one solution, but it's not only the only one out there.
Well, from what I've seen in many cases, a lot of organizations, certainly not all, but quite a number that I've encountered, kind of punt on the front end architecture. Basically, their architecture is, they can talk about the back-end architecture because they've got all sorts of microservices talking to one another. They got this database and that database and whatnot. But the front end, well, that just makes some RESTful API calls, get some information, and more or less just renders it out. So what does it actually mean to have an architecture in the context of the front end?
Okay, so what does it mean? First of all, you need to understand all the moving parts in your front end. It's like you're looking at a web page. A web page is built upon different logical parts. You can divide those parts into different modules. For example, I can create a search module in the application, or some customers module in the application, and then create different visualizations to those parts. And you can divert some front-end team to work with those parts. And so once you divide the application into parts, it resembles microservices in the backend. You have different parts that communicate with one another. And those parts, when you're composing them, you are creating your application. You can do that in different kind of ways. Charles said iframes. Yes, iframe is one of the solutions that you can create. You can divide all the parts into different iframes, and then you can create those parts with different frameworks. The idea of micro frontends, for example, is something that we're hearing a lot during the last 3 or 4 years. So there are different ways to create micro frontends. And once you're really dividing or thinking about your application in boxes of logical parts, then you will need some communication option. In some companies, the communication between the different parts is, created using Redux. I see it a lot. And it's not a good idea, in my opinion. In other applications, like in the application that currently involved, we created really, you said MVC as something like a curse, but we created the containers, and each container, which is the smart components, for example, includes a logical part of the code inside some controller that talks with services, and those services are gateways to the backend. The same controller also talks with Mobix. We use their Mobix as technologies to talk with or to get the information or the data that the smart component needs. And the smart component is just spreading data to the dumb components underneath. So this can be looked at upon how you can create some closed system to handle some different logical parts in your application. Okay, so why would you bother do such a thing? You can just create your web page with from bottom up or down to top with the React, Redux, whatever. Why to divide it? Or why to use such an architecture, for example, like the Dot project?
Can I stop you for a minute? Because
Yes.
You're kind of talking your way around a question that I have, and I'm hoping that you can clarify it here.
Okay.
So a lot of people, they treat React like their architecture, right? It's like, well, I'm just going to architect all this stuff into components, right? Vue or Angular kind of have the same ideas around organizing code. So why is that, or isn't that enough?
Because you need to understand that the components need to talk with one each other. And the idea is how to decouple the components in the components tree. When you are creating your entire web page, you can create it top to bottom with one component that hold the entire page, and then a lot of different components there. And you can spread all the props in React, for example, all the props down the props drilling until the leaves, or you can use some Redux or some Mobix or things like that. But this is not architecture. This is just component composition. Okay.
Right.
So when you have component composition, it's a good idea. Okay. I'm not saying that it's not a good idea to compose components, but where do you put the communication with the server? Where do you do things like we used WebSockets and we wrap them with the RxJS, and we need to get notification from the machine. I said we're building a press machine, a big machine. We have a lot of notification that comes from the server. Where do you put that part? How do you inject those notification, or say to wherever you put your data for the current component or things like that. So you need to think about those things. And if you're not doing separation between those concepts, data, services, components, then how do you test this thing? I know that a lot of people say, we can use unit tests on services or things like that, and it's fine. Or we are not going to do any unit testing. But in some projects, like in the project that I'm involved in, we're testing components. How do you test a component in isolation when you have relations or coupling with your data source or Redux or Mobix or things like that? So this is why we broke things a little farther, and we put most of the logic in React hooks or in services, and we're testing the hooks and the services, and all the things that React is doing for us is just rendering, which is what React was created to do. React is just a library for rendering.
I wanted to add to that something that you also kind of mentioned in passing, which, initially seems like something really, really bad, but it's just the reality of things, and it's the way it is. That very often architecture of complex systems is dictated by how your organization is structured. Basically, you say, show me the components, or the large scale, at least, components that comprise some software system, and I can usually fairly in a straightforward way map it to your org chart. And now it seems silly, like, why is HR effectively dictating the architecture of our software? But in the end of the day, very often that's just the way that it is. And given that that is the way that it is, that's another motivation to minimize the coupling between different systems within your software system, between the various subsystems. Because every time you have coupling, you're creating a dependency between one group within your organization and another group within your organization. And since they are working with, different plans, they have different sprints, you're creating a situation where one group can get stuck because another group that they are dependent on stuff that the other group needs to do for them, because otherwise they just, for example, can't get at the data that they actually need. And for example, in React, you can see these sort of things where you need to kind of propagate props through parent components to the child components if you're not careful. And that means that the parent kind of needs to know what all its descendants need to know in order to perform their operation. And that creates potentially a very tight coupling. And again, if that parent component is owned by one team and one of the descendant child components is owned by another team, that other team that is responsible for the child component, if they need some additional piece of information, they can't actually even get it until that parent component provides it to them, and they're kind of stuck. And that's where you need to think, for example, about how data can flow through your system in ways that reduce such couplings. Would you agree with that, Gil?
I agree, and prop drilling is something that is known not only in React but also in the other frameworks like Vue and Angular, and that's a problem. And once the parent need to know, because the parent is the component that gives all the props to its children, it needs to know what each and every children needs. Then you have a problem. You don't have isolation. You have coupling between the parent and the child component. And in big hierarchies, for example, you can have a parent ancestor that is like 13, 15, 20 depth
levels.
Right.
And in React, there is a solution that is called context. So there are those things, but context also is something that gives you some coupling on some internal React mechanism in order to deliver the data to the child components. So it, from one side, helps you to avoid prop drilling, but in the other side, it gives you much more complexity to organize your code. And this is why libraries like Recoil and Mobix are very successful, because they are trying to move you away from those ideas, the idea of drill all the props down to the bottom of the tree, or to use some tools like, I'm going to say it, but I don't use React in the last 1.5 years, because Redux, I have very different opinions about it. I won't get into it because it's a good library, but it's solving only one thing. And from companies that I was consulting in, it became a big problem. Okay,
well,
so
yeah, what I've seen with Redux is that if it, especially when it's taken to the extreme, it creates a situation where you're effectively putting all of your state inside this a single huge store, which is effectively a global object.
Or you can say it in-memory database.
Yes.
It's like the entire database from your server will in one point of the application lifetime will sit inside your memory in your front end. This is one thing that I see a lot, that developers forget to clean the Redux store from time to time, and then you get memory flood. It's not memory leak, because it's like you're just using tons of memory to hold your entire database or some slice of the database in your front end. So this is one problem in Redux.
And I see two additional problems with that. So for obviously the one that you mentioned, another one is that you no longer have a single source of truth, because it's not an obvious guarantee that your local copy of the data that is stored within your Redux database will be identical to the one that's stored in the central server, as it were. So you can get consistency issues. And the other problem is that database is globally available and accessible by every part of the system. And if we go back to the issue that I mentioned before, where you create situations where one group is dependent on another, and let's say group 1 is dependent on group 2 to provide the information, but group 2 is busy and group 1 is under pressure to deliver, well, guess what they'll do? They'll bypass group number. They'll bypass that other group. They can access that global data store, so they'll just go ahead and access that global data store. And now you've created a non-obvious coupling between that component and the structure of the data in the data store.
Another option is
I've never
they
done
will
that.
use different way to hold their state. For example, I saw in the same project using different tools like combining context because someone had to hack something because the other team was busy, as you said, in an application that is Redux based. So yes, these are major problems that you can see, and this is why solutions like micro frontends that gives you vertical slices in your application on and dividing your front end into different vertical slices it's become more shiny to companies because you have only one ownership for each logical part, the team that is building that, and the team is very specific, working on you said in HR or things related to HR for the application that is built. But in the situation that I have in where we don't have different teams, we have only one front end team. We had problems with things like the backend wasn't created fast like we created the front end, and we had a lot of issues to build the front end without the backend. So we created like a simulator layer to simulate the entire backend to solve that problem, for example.
So, but going back to that, so let's say I decide to buy into that micro front-end type approach of creating strong separation of concerns between the different components and avoiding some sort of a centralized data store that everybody can access to directly. And that kind of means that I need to create some sort of a data bus if I want to share the information between the various components. So what is your general approach there? Do you implement some sort of client-side data bus, or do you just have every component talk directly to the back to the back end?
Okay, so what you're referring to as data bus is some sort of event aggregator. So we created you can call it an event aggregator. In our application, it's just one place that each and every module can sign to listen to different events that other modules are sending. And if nobody is listening to some event that the module is publishing, then nothing will happen. If somebody's meaning another module is listening to the published event, it will do something. And yes, most of the time you will have to have some sort of some mediator that will be able to mediate between different parts, different models. This is one way to look at it. Another way is to say, okay, I want to divide my entire application to not logical parts, but web pages. And each web page is like my entire model. This is not you creating vertical slicing, but rather horizontal slicing of the application. And this can create some difficulties between teams if some team needs to use some component from other team that is building another web page. So whenever those problems comes, then you will use another way of implementing micro frontends, which is a shared component layer.
But basically, again, going back to that event bus or pub sub mechanism or whatever you decide to call it. So I'm kind of amused that you're sort of or at least on a small scale, implementing kind of a front end or client side Kafka system or something like that. For those of you who don't know, by the way, Kafka is an event system that is very popular on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I need to understand whether you think it's a bad idea or whether you think it's a good idea.
Well, as in all,
it depends.
In all things, the devil's in the details, you know.
Yeah, you need some sort of way to communicate between your components, and either you do that with prop drilling, or you do that with the data flows, unidirectional data flow, for example, using Redux or Mobix or other libraries out there that support this unidirectional data flow, or you use a data flow with the no coupling, which is event aggregator. You pick the thing that you want to use as some sort of way to communicate between your components. Okay, this is something that you will have to pick. In the project that I'm currently involved in, we're using Mobix as the way to do unidirectional data flow. In a different project that I'm doing for another company currently, we are creating an entire shared component layer with web components on one hand, and we have event aggregator to aggregate events between those components. So as I said, there is no one solution to the problem of communication between components, but each and every company will probably choose what fits to their needs. I can assure you that the company that has the shared component layer with the event aggregator, the idea is that each and every module in their application needs to be decoupled from everything. Everything there is very modular, and every module can be replaced by different modules. And this is why they went that way. In most of the applications, you are not creating some generic screen that can be manipulated by the user. You have what you're going to create, so there is no need for some massive decoupling. And this is why companies that don't need event aggregators goes to unidirectional data flow, which is a good idea to make a consistency of the data inside your front end.
Can you briefly explain what unidirectional data flow actually means?
Okay, so unidirectional data flow, the idea is that data flows only on one way. In most of the applications, from top to bottom. Okay, this is like you don't have two-way binding, meaning that the screen isn't updating the data or vice versa. The data is updating the screen. The data is only flowing on one direction, and that direction is from the data to the screen. If the screen needs to notify or change the data it shows, it sends some action or some sort of notification to some store or whatever. How do you implement that? And that stores up, do some manipulation and notify the screen that the data changed and send that data back to the screen. So the data is always having only one cycle, and you don't have two-way binding, meaning that the data can be updated from different parts, or the parts can update the data, vice versa.
I'll add to that if we go back a couple of years, the concept of data binding was really popular. It was popularized even before the web, and a lot of early web frameworks kind of adopted that because that seemed to be the way that most people wanted to work. It kind of seems to make a lot of sense because, for example, you display a particular screen of data which matches a particular record in a database. So you've got the different screen elements being mapped to different fields within that record. And usually you could also go back or forward a record. So you could edit the table in that way. And basically the data from that database record was read and displayed directly on the screen. So that's the flow in one direction of flow of data. But then also, if you updated any of those fields on the screen within that form, that would immediately automatically update the data back in the record. So effectively, you had a one-to-one binding and matching between a particular screen field and the field within the database. So that's what is meant by data binding. And very often, you might actually even bind the same database field to multiple screen elements. So, for example, like a situation where you're showing notifications for unread content, they might appear in different places on the screen. So you actually bound all of those items to that same field, and clicking on any one of those items would impact that field, which would then automatically impact all the rest of the visual items that were linked to it. And that would create situations in which data flow became really complicated, and you created all sorts of race conditions between, when certain items were updated on the screen and in the database. And that's where that unidirectional flow of information tries to address those issues, but adds complexities of its own.
Right.
Of course.
So, hey, folks, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And lately I've been working on actually building out Top End Devs. If you're interested, you can go to topenddevs.com/podcast, and you can actually hear a little bit more about my story about why I'm doing what I'm doing with Top End Devs, why I changed it from devchat.tv to Top End Devs. But what I really want to get into is that I have decided that I'm going to build the platform that I always wished I had with devchat.tv, and I renamed it to Top End Devs because I want to give you the resources that are going to help you to build the career that you want, right? So whether you want to be an influencer in tech, whether you want to go and just max out your salary and then go live a lifestyle with your family, your friends, or just traveling the world or whatever, I want to give you the resources that are going to help you do that. We're going to have career and leadership resources in there, and we're going to be giving you content on a regular basis to help you level up and max out your career. So go check it out at topenddevs.com. If you sign up before my birthday, that's December 14th. If you sign up before my birthday, you can get 50% off the lifetime of your subscription. Once again, that's topenddevs.com. So my question is let's say that I decide, you know what, I don't need this mediator in the middle. I've got a relatively simpler app, right? And my problem set lends itself much more to this other architecture. And then, as all things do, my app gets more complicated, right? It has more things that need to keep track of more things, and other things that need to keep track of things that come off of those things. And I start thinking, you know what? That mediator is really sounding good right now. It seems to really kind of fix some of these issues that I'm running into with my app. At what point do you start playing with either going hybrid or making a migration from one architecture to another? Because at this point, the one architecture is now making more sense than the architecture that I started with. And I made the right call at the beginning, right? Because I didn't over-engineer it to begin with, right?
Yeah, but this is a good question, because moving from one architecture or non-architecture to an architecture, it can be very cumbersome. It's not I'm taking a magic wand and waving it and everything works. A lot of things in the application will break or will not function when you're starting to try to decouple things. My suggestion is going from bottom top, meaning that you start with the bottom components in your application, meaning all the DOM components which are easy to create or to move to the architecture. But it's like taking some part of the web page and starting there. Okay, as I said, vertical slicing. Start with just one main component, which is some part of the web page, and try to tackle it and impose the architecture there. And then from there, go on and migrate another vertical slice. In most of the application that I'm currently building, we're starting with building some shared component layer, either in React, Web Components, Angular, whatever. That shared component layer helps to remove some difficulties when you're doing those migrations. So it's a good idea to start with dividing your application when you're starting building it into the UI layer, into the shared component layer, into a package for gateways. And whenever you have those three moving parts, then when you build your application, it will be, I won't say simpler to migrate to a new architecture, but it will help you to do the migration. And I can say something about it's not only migration to architecture. It's sometimes it's migration to technologies. I had the pleasure. I'm doing that thing
Air quotes
with my hands. Yeah, the pleasure of helping some big enterprises to combine two different applications into one. One of them was created with AngularJS with like 5 million lines of code. And it had to hold a new application that was created with Angular. Back then, it was Angular 5. And we had to migrate the entire AngularJS code. And the manager said, yes, do it in 1 month. Go.
Wow.
This is where the iframe thing came, and we created the iframe around the application that we wanted to migrate around, and then said to the managers, yes, we did the migration. Okay, it's working inside the other application. Everything is fine. And then we took like 7 months later to migrate the entire thing. Okay, so it's not only architecture migration, it's a problem to do migration in a whole. It's like moving from one technology to another. And so, as I said, you start with small parts and then you you move to the higher or bigger parts of your application later on.
I totally agree. And I would even take it a step further and say that from my experience, if you're going to re-architect a system, and it doesn't matter if it's from one architecture to another or from no architecture to an architecture, then at the end of the day, the best bet is basically to bite the bullet and rewrite the system. So the situations in which I've seen in which in which an attempt was done to impose a different architecture on an existing system usually ended in tears. Now, if you're lucky, like Gil said, maybe you can kind of slice up this operation into steps. So, for example, you might convert it one screen at a time. So let's, and in that regard, it is very much like going from one architecture to another. Let's say you have some sort of application that was written in Amber, and you say, hey, I don't want to use this technology anymore because it's really difficult to, recruit the developers. They don't want to use this framework. They want to go React. Then one possibility is just to switch, one page at a time. Just change it that when you switch from this page to that page, you kind of switch to the other system. And then you slowly grow that other system to eat more and more pages, to take away more and more pages from the existing system. Or like Gil said, maybe you can kind of embed an iframe and kind of stick one system inside of the other, and then grow that iframe up until you effectively everything in the page is within that iframe, and then it's no longer an iframe, it just becomes the page. So the app, exactly. So maybe you can do these things, but at the end of the day, it's a rewrite. That's kind of the reason why picking an architecture is important. But like you said, Charles, it could be that you picked one architecture at a certain point in time because it made that perfect sense at that time, and then it doesn't make sense anymore. I can tell you that at Wix, for example, what is called the Wix viewer, which is that part of the product which actually displays the websites built by Wix's customers, and obviously it's a large and sophisticated system. During my time at Wix, I was there for 7.5 years. It was rewritten from scratch twice.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Rewrites are painful too, though. And that's quite kind of cringing over here because I'm going.
Yeah, but when we had an attempt to take so after the first rewrite, we needed to really change the data flow within the system for a good reason, because we changed the requirements for the product. It became more interactive. Mm-hmm. And initially an attempt was made to kind of re-architect the existing solution, it barely held water, and we needed to rebuild it in order to get the performance and functionality and the flexibility that we wanted in the system.
Yeah, it seems like because I've seen people do kind of like what Gil outlined in that, hey, we had Angular 5 and we moved it, I've seen that work, right? And sometimes your system is kind of set up that way, right? So if it's loading, a page at a time, or you can move stuff into an iframe and expand the scope of the iframe. But sometimes it's at a fundamental level. And that's what Dan's talking about, where it's, we need this to actually work differently than it does now, right? It's not just these neat slices that we can pull off or something like that, right? Where you can kind of get away with that in a lot of cases if you're replacing one framework with another. In this case, at its core, it has to do different work in order to get the job done. Yeah, you're probably going to have to rewrite it.
But what I can say is don't be afraid of rewrites, but your managers are going to be afraid.
Yeah.
Well,
I think there are trade-offs.
The problem with rewrites, and I think you've already addressed this, is that most rewrites are never completed. Most rewrites result in two code bases that don't get the attention that they need, and both are buggy and not getting the product to where it needs to be for the customers.
So what happened at Wix in that regard is that we were really strict about it. Basically, a time frame was set, acceptance criteria were made, lots of tests were written, and there was a deadline specified to when the old code base needs to die, because the organization can't handle supporting both. But it was a very significant effort, undoubtedly.
So I wanted to bring up two questions. One is, when do you make the decisions for what the architecture should be? We've talked a lot about changing midstream, but somebody made a decision in the first place that you had to go back and undecide and redecide, right? So let's go with that first.
First of all, I think that whenever you start a project, you need to realize that you will have some sort of architecture. You need to do it as part of the starting point of the application. It's not enough to pick a framework. It's a good idea to pick a framework, React, Angular, whatever. But it's not architecture. We said that at the beginning. So what I suggest is do it whenever you're creating your high level design of the application. You need to start at the beginning. If you're not going to do that, you can say to the developers that are currently building, and this is what I'm currently doing in a project. I want to see the design details of the feature that you are going to build before you are going to implement it. I don't want you to go like horse with the blinding
blinders.
I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to rush to development. I want you to tell me how you're going to implement it in terms of communications between the components. Which component are you going to use or implement? How you are going to do that? And once you are doing that, then I'm validating the design that the developer is doing and giving my input, and only then I'm telling them you can proceed, you can go and you can implement the feature. So you can think about designing features as some sort of an architecting step inside your development cycles. Okay, so if you don't have a high level architecture, like I said in the beginning of the project, then you can do some sort of small designs or small architectures, parts, meetings in your group when you are creating the application while you're you're creating some feature in the application.
I would add to that,
if it
makes a lot of sense, and I would add to that not making decisions about architecture is an architectural decision. Your system is going to have some sort of architecture, whether you design it or not. The only question is how cohesive it is, or how messed up it is. And if you don't because data will need to flow through your system. There are going to be application states. So if you're not going to be designing it from the top down, it will kind of evolve from the bottom up. And like Gil said, if making a cohesive long-term architectural decision is problematic for you, then one thing you can indeed try to do is try to split up the things into self-contained components that could later, line up better with whatever top-down architecture you decide to impose, or at the very least, when you're forced to rewrite your system, at least you can take those components and copy them from the previous code base to the next code base.
So one of the things that I think it's Rob Pike that's said it this way is much of the time, the constraints of the language require that we make too many decisions for which we know the least information at the very time that they're going to cause us the most trouble. And I hope, did that come across clearly?
Kind of.
I'm going to take that as a no. So we front load decisions that are difficult to change and that we're unlikely to make correctly because we don't have enough information yet, because you learn as you build. That's emergent design. As you build.
So where do you draw the line? I mean, to follow that, you could keep going. Oh, I still don't have enough information, or I still don't have enough information. So right. I guess you'd have to figure where to draw that line.
I can say something about that, because in most applications you have requirements, and companies come to me and they are giving me the requirements, and they are saying, can you help us to evaluate the architecture that we are doing? And from my experience, because I saw not one or two or three projects, but more than 100 different projects, I can help them to understand, or to give them from my experience and evaluate what they're trying to do. This is some consulting that I'm doing regularly to companies, even not tomorrow, but on Sunday I have a new company that came to me with the same request. We're trying to evaluate micro frontends. We need some help. Can you help us? So one thing is you can consult with a consultant. Another way to do those things is just to rely on the experience of the developers, or the architect in your company, or CTO, whoever is in charge of designing the system. And you have to make those decisions, even though they might be wrong. But if you don't do that, there won't be any application in the end. So we will have to live with the decision. It's like what I'm saying about whenever we are picking a framework. Whenever you are picking a framework like Angular, React, Vue, or whatever, you're getting married with that framework. After you got married, the divorce will be ugly if you want to move from one framework to another. But we are still doing that. You need to pick the technologies. You need to evaluate some architecture, create some architecture. Even as Dan said, not creating an architecture is an architecture by itself. But in the end, somebody needs to draw the line. Where do you do the cat?
I will add to that, and I think that this is something that AJ will happily agree with, is that you should always prefer small and simple. I've seen way too many situations in which front ends were over-architected. It's much, at the very least, if you choose a simple architecture and it ends up being the wrong one, well, you've spent less resources building it than if you've created a really complicated architecture and then it turns out to be the wrong one. And simpler architectures also are easier to mutate or enhance into various directions. So, for example, and it's really unfortunate in my mind that a lot of the systems that we are currently using for modern web development actually encourage us to create really sophisticated architectures. So, for example, in many cases, using an MPA type approach where each page is delivered separately is a much simpler type of a solution than implementing a single page application, because you don't need to manage a data store that, persists between pages. You just request additional information from the backend whenever you need more information. And go for it, AJ.
For people that aren't up on today's latest buzzwords, MPA is the new buzzword that means website like we used to build in the 90s.
Exactly.
Just
Yeah, exactly.
The Rails developer in me is gratified that there's a term for it now.
Yeah. And it's...
there's performance concerns there too if you're always having to go to your back end. And I suppose then you could throw in things like Cloudflare or CDNs or...
If you're bad at building architectures, no matter which architecture you pick, you can make it underperformant.
Yes, that's true. But at the same time, there's ways to make it... Sometimes you have more foot guns, I guess,
I think,
if you're going to work.
But the unfortunate reality, though, is that when you look at the modern application frameworks that are out there, the Next, the Nux, the Remix, the SvelteKit, all of them encourage single-page applications. Some of them do it better than others, but at the end of the day, they all encourage that. And I find that to be a bit unfortunate, because I do think that in many cases, having a simpler architecture, which is each page is delivered independently, is much easier and much simpler. And you're kind of being forced to use WordPress for that because there are no alternatives.
Well, let's define page real quick, because part of the thing is that when you look at today's applications, they are Twitter, right? Twitter has one function. It's not something that's useful. It's not a productivity platform, right? It shows you stupid things that people that you don't care about say to make other people angry. That is what Twitter does, right? And it's not hard to do that. You just need to show a picture of a person so you can get an emotional response of, oh, I'm already going to agree or I'm already going to disagree. And then the words so that you can start forming your rational argument to how you reply. That's not a hard thing to build in a single page.
Yeah, but...
So what is a different page?
Well, let's put it this way. Most websites that are more than just content websites are about building forms, right? And putting in information and also viewing information. Well, whenever you click submit, that could theoretically be a page navigation. But the reality is that these days it usually isn't. Usually these days it's JavaScript intercepting that button and then doing stuff with it and then sending some stuff to the back end but keeping some other stuff in the front end and doing a lot of complicated things.
Nobody wants to wait for the page reload just to see their angry response to somebody else's tweet appear below it. We want that instant.
Well, and that's the thing, because if you think about who created React, for example.
It was Twitter.
No, it was Facebook.
No, it was the one they couldn't acquire. Facebook.
So it was Facebook. And React is a great tool for when you're building a Facebook. It's not necessarily such a great tool when you're building a blog site. And yet the reality is that these days, if you ask people, how are you building, the devs, we devs like to build our own blog sites, or our own blogging frameworks and whatnot. What are you using? I'm using Next.js. What is Next.js built on? React. And it's a single page application. Why is my blog a single page application? Why, when I navigate between blog posts, do I need to do it via an AJAX call to get the data and then render it on the client side instead of just getting the HTML from the server?
Because you don't want to be doxxed. You want your own mistakes to help you. So if nobody can navigate to the page because there's no URL structure.
No. Boom. These days there is a URL structure.
I know.
You intercept the URL with your router.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a hard stop coming up, by the way, so we need to derail back onto the topic and wrap up.
Well, so one thing I wanted to say with the whole, what's the different page? So I was hoping to evoke this, but whenever you have an idea in your head, you should just say it.
Well, just to say, a different page is when you have a different URL.
Oh, whoa, those are fighting words. But so you've got on Twitter, you've got the feed, you've got the messages, you've got the bookmarks, You've got the account. Basically, I would say anytime you have a profile or user account, that's a separate app. Whatever it is that your app does, unless your app is a CRM, managing user profiles is just a separate app. Don't try to put it in the main app. I think that's one of the most perfect examples of what should be a separate page is the user profile stuff.
All right, folks, with that non sequitur, we're going to go ahead and do picks.
So it is.
Wait a minute. Before we go picks, though, we do need to give Gil, I think, a chance to say some final words. Usually you do give that option.
I agree.
So, Gil,
I do.
Anything we missed? Any additional, summary of information or things you wanted to say and we neglected to say?
I will do it short. No.
All right. All right, let's do picks then. Hi, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been coaching some people on starting some podcasts and in some cases just taking their career to the next level. Whether you're beginner going to intermediate going to advanced, whether you're trying to get noticed in the community or go freelance, I've been helping these folks figure out how to get in front of people, how to build relationships, and how to build their careers and max out and just go to the next level. So if you're interested in talking to me and having me help you go to the next level, go to topenddevs.com/coaching. I will give you a 1-hour free session where we can figure out what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and figure out what the next steps are. And then from there, we can figure out how to get you to the place you want to go. So once again, that's topenddevs.com/coaching. Dan, do you want to start us off with picks?
Okay, for sure. So I really have, I have 2 picks this time. My first pick is this. I don't know if you know this, but approximately, almost exactly 2 months ago, 58 days, a very severe bug having to do with privacy was found in the IndexedDB API in Safari 15. Mm-hmm. Basically, when a table is created in one frame or window of Safari, all other open windows and frames, etc., see the name of that table. So they don't see the content of the table, but they see the name of the table. Now, you might ask, why is it so bad? Well, because the name of the table can tell you which other sites are running in the other tabs. One tab is not supposed to know what you have open in the other tabs. Or even worse, sometimes the tables contain information like the identifier of your ID within that other application. Probably not your password, but your account name. So you could know that, in a different tab, the user is in, let's say, in website X, and their account within that website is Y, which is obviously information that you're not supposed to have about some other website. Now, on Mac OS X, there's a very easy fix for this bug, and that fix is don't use Safari. Use some other. Because
it's true.
Because it's taking them over 2 months to fix it. I gather that they're working on it. Eventually a fix will come out.
I hope so.
So just use Chrome or Edge or Firefox or Brave or whatever for the time being. And when they come up with a fix, you can always switch back. The problem is that on iOS, you don't have any recourse, because on iOS, all browsers on the inside are actually Safari. So on iOS, whether you're using Safari or Chrome or Firefox, it's actually Safari on the inside, and you've got this bug. So we've got a really severe privacy issue affecting all browsers on iOS for the simple reason that on iOS, there is no browser choice. You are locked into Safari on iOS. And, one of the reasons that they give for that has to do with privacy and security. Well, here we see the exact opposite situation because of the lack of browser choice on iOS. So that would be my first pick. I'll give a link to the details of the story if anybody is interested in the technical details of what the actual problem is. My other pick has to do with the fact that Amazon Prime is now finally available in Israel. And it's actually fairly cheap. and there were some things that I wanted to see. So I actually subscribed to Amazon Prime. And one of the things that I'm watching now that I would like to call out is Invincible. It's an animated series about superheroes, and it's really out there in terms of, the subjects that they cover and how gory it gets. It's definitely not something for the little kids, but it's really good, and I'm enjoying it a lot. So that would be my second pick, and those are my picks for today.
And I will vouch for the second pick because I saw the entire show and it's very
No
good.
spoilers, please. I'm only in the middle.
I haven't said anything about it. I just said it's very good.
Cool.
Good deal. All right, AJ, what are your picks?
Well, I've got some good ones for you today. So I've talked about how I've upgraded my monitor setup, and I love the Dell monitor, which I guess I'll just throw that link in there anyway. But also, it's a little bit troublesome to figure out which Thunderbolt hubs and adapters to get because they thought, USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 and all that. It's just too many things multiplexed on top of each other, and finding a hub that actually works and does the right thing is obnoxious. So I'm going to give you all a little cheat. If you're looking for a Thunderbolt hub for one of the new M1 computers, there's the Sonnet Echo 5 for just generic Thunderbolt hub that actually supports at least all of the Thunderbolt features that I'm using. Maybe it's missing some that I'm not, but it seems that they must have attention to detail because it has VRR support for DisplayLink. And then the Wavelink Thunderbolt 3 to DisplayPort adapter, because that also has VRR support for DisplayLink. But I don't know. It's so hard depending on what feature of Thunderbolt or USB 4 you're interested in that the devices that you're connecting to support. Maybe these won't work specifically for your device. But I ordered several of both. I basically ordered about $1,000 worth of adapters and sent them all back except for these two, because these were the two that seemed to support all of my devices correctly with all of their features. And then on the topic of Office upgrades, there's these little, I've been using I forget the name of it now, but that company that sends you those books every month that have all the office supplies in it, Uline. I've been using the Uline books to raise up my desk at the other office. And, that works pretty good. I think the Uline catalog is great. And I think everybody should have a few Uline catalogs. They work great for blocking vents when, it's summer and icy air is blowing, or when it's winter and burning hot air is blowing. They work great for raising desks. They work great for raising monitors. They're just nice, thick, sturdy catalogs. But, and all you need to do to get an unlimited supply of Uline catalogs is just do anything that classifies as registering a business in any way, shape, or form on any website or with any government, and you will get an unending supply of them. I love them. They're great. But that's not actually what I was intending to pick for the desk. And it turns out these would probably work for couches and for other things as well. There's a company, I guess, I don't know what the company's called, Slipstick. Yeah, it's called Slipstick. And they make these little furniture lifts. They work for beds or desks or whatever, but they're great. They're stackable. You get a pack. It comes with 8 of them, so you can choose how to distribute that. Because the desk at work had 5 legs instead of 4, because it's one of those weird shaped ones, I had to get 2 packs to start. But, you can raise your desk to 1 stack or 2 stack or 3 stacks, whatever. And I just think that they're really awesome. So I'm going to pick the Slipstick furniture lifts. Other than that, there's one other thing. So I gave my apology in the last episode to VAR for slandering it when it didn't deserve it. VAR does not have any exceptions. It is entirely consistent. But I did a presentation, a visual presentation with code examples on the cold hard truth about Consulate and VAR. So if you want to check that out, I'm linking to that as supplementary material to the last podcast where we discussed that my presentation fixes a few mistakes that I made. And then other than that, it's just the normal stuff. Webinstall.dev for all your tools, creedsofcraftsmanship.com for good articles and videos on software engineering. And you can follow my live streams and Beyond Code on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter and all the things.
Awesome. Steve, what are your picks?
All right. The high point of the podcast, as always, the dad jokes. So I've got 2, I think, pretty decent ones today.
Unmuting for maximum laughter.
Same here.
Yes. Okay. So one of the things I love...
you need to unmute in case you laugh.
When you laugh.
In case you laugh.
Okay. So
There it goes.
I love putting on warm underwear fresh out of the dryer. I mean, it feels good, right? When you put it on. Plus, it's super fun to look around the laundromat and guess who they belong to.
Okay.
That one was clever. Okay.
And my drum joke's not working again.
I didn't see that one coming. I didn't see that one coming.
All right. So you're going to have to imagine the drum joke. I'm not sure why it's not working in Riverside. So I have a 10-year-old son. And when he was smaller, he asked me where poo comes from. I decided to be honest with him. And after I explained, he asked with a slightly terrified and complex look, "What about Eeyore?"
I did see that one coming.
So anyway, those are my jokes for the day.
All right. Nothing else you want to shout out about?
No, nothing today.
All right. Well, you can hear more of Steve's tortured soul on Views on View then. I'm going to throw out a few picks. I'm going to make it fast because I really do have to get over to this other thing at noon. First of all, I usually do a board game pick. And while I was down at this funeral, my daughter brought up Candyland and wanted to play. So we played Candyland, my 6-year-old and I. And yeah, it's a fun little game. Play with your kiddos.
During the funeral?
Actually, yes, because she was sick. So we stayed at my mother-in-law's while everybody else went to the funeral because it was my wife's family. Anyway, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah. And then other picks. I can't think of anything at the moment that I'm really jazzed about. Oh, I did listen to the Brandon Sanderson Skyward series. They released 3 novellas and 1 full-length novel. And the novel was... it was entertaining and it moved along, but it wasn't the best of that particular series. As far as the rest of it goes, yeah, I really enjoyed the novellas, actually. They were pretty darn good. So I'm going to shout out about those and just remind everybody to go check out Top End Devs. Gil, what are your picks?
Okay, so I'm going to pick something that came along with the Chrome 97, the last version that they released. You have a new Chrome recorder. It's currently experimental, but this is a very good idea that they started to implement.
To clarify,
it enables you to...
you kind of neglected to say it's in the dev tools in Chrome. It's part of the dev tools.
Sorry. So it's part of the dev tools. It's a new tab. It is called Chrome Recorder. It enables you to record user flows and then to run those user flows and see performance issues on those user flows. I really think that it's a good idea. It can be very helpful. One of the major topics that I'm always interested in is performance tuning. So this is relates to that. The second pick, it's going to be a series that I started to see with my dear wife on Netflix. It is called Blacklist with James Spader. I won't say anything about it. It's a very good series. We're currently in season 3, and I can't say anything because I'm not going to do any spoilers, but if you want to see a very decent series, thriller series, go and thrill and smart series, go to and see the Blacklist with James Spader.
I just want to add one more thing about that recorder tab in the DevTools. It has another cool feature in which you can actually export the recordings and then you could play them back in Puppeteer, which makes it also a useful tool for building end-to-end script for end-to-end tests.
Oh, nice.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Yep. My wife and I have been watching Blacklist, and we've been watching it on Netflix, not as it comes out every week. And so we just wait for the whole season to drop. And yeah, we're in the middle of season 8, I think, which is the latest one they have on Netflix. So whatever the latest one in Netflix is, that's when we're watching. And yeah, it's been a really, really fun series to watch. So +1 on that. All right, Gil, if people want to find you online, where do they find you?
At Gil Fink in Twitter. That's the main place. If you want to talk with me, DM me. I will try to answer you if you have anything anything to ask. And you can also find me in my email, gil@sparksys.com. This is my company email if you need any services of web consultant, either in architecture, performance tuning, or anything else. I will be very happy to help.
Awesome. All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up right here. And until next time, Max out.
Bye.
Adios.
Adios.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN.
Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.
Welcome to BreezeLine, where you'll say, "Ta-ta, T-Mobile. Our home internet is just plain better. More reliable and faster because we put internet first. If there's network congestion, we won't slow your internet down like T-Mobile does to help their cell customers. And right now, you can try out a true internet experience with BreezeLine's reliable and fast fiber-powered home internet. Find your perfect speed with prices starting at $19.99 a month for 24 months. Terms and conditions apply. Go to breezeline.com to learn more.
When you download the Kroger app, you have easy access to savings every day. Shop weekly sales and get personalized coupons to get the most value out of every trip, every time, whether you shop in-store or online. Download the Kroger app now to save big. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Must have a digital account to redeem offers. Restrictions may apply. See site for details.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More, Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.